This is RandyMayeux, speech teacher at Eastfield College, and this is a lecture for Speech 1311. And you should have in your hands the handout called Overview and Initial Concepts. Overview and Initial Concepts. Now, this is a fairly simple idea, and that is you ought to understand some of the undergirding, some of the foundational principles of communication before you study how to communicate, how to prepare a speech, how to deliver a speech, etc. You need to understand the thinking underneath communication. Now, you do not have this on this sheet. This is worth writing down. I hope that you will write this down and ponder it. There is an ancient formula, and that is that all communication requires a sender, a medium, and a receiver. So assuming you have a message to communicate, then you have to have a way to send it. You might send it by talking to them, and that would be conversation. You are talking to them. You might send it by making a phone call. You might send it by making a phone call or sending a text message. So that's the medium. The sender has a message. He or she sends it. There's a medium to send it through, and then the receiver has to receive the message. And until the receiver says, I got it, I understand what you're saying, you have not communicated. So all communication requires a sender, a medium, and a receiver. And I told you in the first introductory lecture, we're going to come back to this in a few moments, I told you that all good communication boils down to two simple concepts. Have something to say and say it very well. Hope you'll get those phrases in your mind. Have something to say and say it very well. Well, on this sheet, I'm going to do about the first half of the front page in this brief lecture. I'll give you other lectures other nights. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, not going to make you listen to an hour and a half of lecture. We'll do it in pieces. So this is the one that I will be sending out today. All right, at the top, from Aristotle, rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. Rhetoric is the art. Circle the word art. It is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. Now, Aristotle was pretty much the father of everything we know about communication. He lived in ancient Greece. He was a genius and a half. He was a mathematician, a scientist, a rhetorician. He was an incredibly educated person. And if you know the history, then you have Socrates and Plato, and then you have Aristotle being taught from them. And then Aristotle became the private tutor of a young boy named Alexander, who became Alexander the Great. So he was at the top of the pole of intellectual giant, Aristotle was. And he said that rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. It's an art, not a science. If I hold my phone here and I let go of it, it falls. I'm in a place where this is heavier than air, this is Earth's atmosphere, you let it go, it falls. That's science. If you drop this 10 times, if you drop this 100 times or 1,000 times, that is science. That is exactly guaranteed outcome. That is the outcome that you will expect if you drop a phone, drop a keys, drop a pin in Earth's atmosphere. It's going to fall. That's science. And science, if you understand the science and you're where the science works, has predictable outcome. Speaking does not have a predictable outcome. You cannot guarantee that the audience agrees with you, understands you, gets the message. You already know this. If you look at political advertising, half of them say vote this way, half of them say vote another way, and there is no formula to write the perfect ad to get everybody to change their mind. And so it is a lifelong process to figure out, how do I make my case to get people to agree with me so that I can persuade them? This is not for this lecture, but later in the semester, I will teach you that persuasion is to change someone's mind, attitude, or behavior. So rhetoric, according to Aristotle, is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. He says there were three primary means of persuasion. You're going to want to fill these blanks in. I'll tell you in a little bit about how much of this will be on your first major test. And so Aristotle said there are three major means of persuasion. Now, these words are Greek words, and there has never been a good enough English word to replace them. And so if you read the textbook in speech, if you read a textbook in English, it's going to tell you about these three ideas from Aristotle, and they are, number one, logos, L-O-G-O-S, logos. That is the Greek word for word, but it stands for the logical appeal. This is the content of the argument. It makes sense. Write that down on your sheet. It makes sense. That's the idea. It makes sense, and therefore it can be persuasive because it makes sense. Now, interestingly, just making sense doesn't persuade anybody or everybody. For example, have you ever driven down the street with your phone in your hand, texting a message while you drive? Well, you know that that is not a smart thing to do. You know that that is a deadly thing to do. You know that there are wrecks every day all over the country, all over the world, where people are texting while driving. You know that you can't even text while you drive. If you're texting at that moment, you're not driving. If you're driving at that moment, you're not texting. So if I say to you, do not text while you drive, it is very dangerous and could end up wrecking your car, killing somebody else, or killing you, you would say in your head, sure, I know that, but you might still occasionally text while you drive. So logic alone is not convincing, is not persuasive, but it is an element of persuasion. And if you believe in the logic of a message, if it makes sense, then it is giving you a major reason to believe that way. The second Greek word and the second means of persuasion is ethos, E-T-H-O-S, ethos. This is the ethical appeal. There was another ancient definition of rhetoric by Quintilian that said rhetoric is, quote, a good man speaking well. It's a good line. Now, back then only men did the speaking. Today we would say a good person speaking well. But what it means is, it is a person who can be trusted, a good person, who is communicating effectively, speaking well. So they are trustworthy. They are telling you the truth as they understand it. They're not lying to you. They're not misleading you. They're not manipulating you. They are communicating the truth as they grasp it. And you can trust them because they have credibility and trustworthiness. And so look at what I've written here. The ethical appeal, the character of the speaker creates believability and credibility. Circle the word credibility. That's critical. What is it that gives a person credibility? And the answer is that credibility comes from truthfulness and competence and maybe a touch of goodwill, plenty of goodwill. So truthfulness first, they're not going to lie to you. Competence, they know what they're talking about. And then goodwill, they wish you the best. They want the best for you from their message to you. I have a pocket knife. It's a wonderful pocket knife. It was given to me and my other brothers by one of our brothers, Brother Mike, our brother Mike. And it says in Latin, and you can see that it says it right here, Mayeux de Fratrum, the brotherhood of the Mayeux. And so we all have this knife, and I carry it fondly. It's a good knife. I've never really carried a pocket knife until this one. And this pocket knife is sharp and effective. If we were in our live classroom, I would pull this out and I would say, if any of you need surgery, just give me a call and I'll come cut your body open and perform the surgery. I could do it. I've got a tool. I've got a sharp knife. I could perform the surgery. But you know, and I know, that you would never call me and I would not be dumb enough to perform surgery on you because I do not have the competence. When a person is speaking, the audience believes that person knows what they are talking about. They're competent. And the competence allows them to relax and accept the message. But they also have to believe that the speaker is telling the truth. So those two factors are critical in ethos. They're telling the truth and they know what they're talking about, and then add that element of goodwill. So what Aristotle said was, if a message makes sense, it's logical. If the message is delivered with a person with great ethos, they're competent, they know what they're talking about, they are experienced and qualified, and you can trust them to tell you the truth, there's a better chance of persuasion. But there's a third element of persuasion, and it is pathos. Number 3, pathos, P-A-T-H-O-S. This is the emotional appeal. This is a combination of the passion of the speaker. We use old-fashioned terms like enthusiasm. The speaker, he or she, really believes this stuff, and it matters to them, and they're passionate about it. But it is also the emotional appeal made to the listener or the audience. And so it might be an appeal to fear. It might be an appeal to hope. It might be an appeal to love. It is an appeal to an emotion. We're going to look later in the semester at Maslow's hierarchy of human need, and we'll delve into this a little bit deeper at that point. But the idea is that if you want to persuade people, let's go back to the illustration of texting while you are driving. If I say to you, you might run over your little sister and kill her because you're not paying attention as you pull into the driveway, that's an appeal to fear. Or you love your little sister, you would never want to hurt her, and so you keep your phone put away. That's an appeal to love. So this combination of love and fear, both of those are very powerful emotional persuasive tools. So here are the 3. These are all from Aristotle. Logos, it makes sense. It's the logical appeal. Ethos, the ethical appeal. The speaker, the communicator, knows what he or she is talking about, is competent, experienced, knowledgeable, and you can trust them to tell the truth. And pathos, they have emotion about it, and they are speaking to the emotion of the listener. Let me back up one more time on that third one. I'm a decent researcher. I can read books. I can find out the significance in the books. I can learn things, and I can speak them in speeches and messages. I'm a decent researcher. So I could come up with logical arguments and ethical arguments for certain things, but I want you to know that I never want to give a speech. I mean, you could hire me to do this, but I never want to give a speech on how to put on makeup. That doesn't interest me. I have no emotion about that. I have no passion about that. Oh, I admire people who wear makeup well, but I don't want to learn how to do that. So I would not be the one to give that speech. I have no passion about it. If you want to get a speech on how to land an airplane in a river with no engine power, get Chesley Sullenberger. Sully, the guy who landed at the Hudson River a few years ago with no engine power. He has passion for it and competence in it. I don't have either. Although I guess I would have passion if I was on a plane and I wanted it to land safely. So the idea is that you've got to have logic, ethics, and passion. Logos, ethos, pathos. Now look very carefully at your outline. This is important to note. Number 4 is in brackets. It is a 4th Greek word, but it is not from Aristotle. We don't know who came up with this. One friend of mine says it was, I think, Cicero, but we've never been able to back that up. We just know it comes from the era of the ancient rhetoricians, and the Greek word number 4 is mythos, M-Y-T-H-O-S, mythos. This is the narrative appeal, the overarching, ongoing, shared story. And mythos can be a very powerful tool of persuasion. Now look at the word mythos and circle the word within the word mythos, and it is the word myth. What is a myth? And it is common for people to think that a myth is a story that isn't true. You know, it's a made-up myth. It's just a myth. But the reality is that a myth, and I want you to write this down, and it's going to sound contradictory. Write it down the way I tell you. A myth is a story that is true, whether it is true or not. A myth is a story that is true, whether it is true or not. And the use of mythos in a speech is to tell stories that are part of an overarching story that people say, that's my story. That's the story I want to live. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Have you ever known anybody who didn't use their head? Have you ever known anybody who pretty smart, but they didn't care about people? Have you ever known anybody who pretty smart and did care about people, but in a moment of testing, did not stand up in a courageous way? I'm recording this during the day, on the day that George Floyd's funeral took place. And there are some NFL players, National Football League, who have basically come out and now said, now I get it. Now I get it why certain players were protesting a few years ago about the police treatment of African Americans. And so they now get it, and so they're changing their story. And that's literally what they're doing. They're changing their story. Martin Luther King Jr. said on his last speech on April 3rd, 1968, he said, all we say to America is to be true to what you say on paper. Live up to your story. It's a great line. So back to this idea of people who use their head and then they feel for people and then they stand up in courage like the NFL is dealing with now. Well, do you know a story that tells that story? How about if I only had a brain, if I only had a heart, if I only had courage? The Wizard of Oz is a story that is not true. There was no Dorothy. There was no Yellow Brick Road. There was no Land of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is a story that was not true, but is true. That you have a brain, you have a heart, you have courage, you can find it within you, find it and use it, develop it. And so mythos, a myth, is a story that is true whether it's true or not. And this is the narrative appeal. Let me back up and say that the best speakers are exceptional storytellers. And the best stories are stories that beckon people to be part of the story. So that's the first element on this overview and initial concepts. From Aristotle, rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion. Logos, the logical appeal. I said that that's the Greek word for word. For those of you who are maybe Christian in your background, whenever you read the word word in the Christian Bible, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That is the Greek word logos. It's older than the Christian Bible, the word is, and it meant kind of the powerful force of the universe. It's a really provocative study to study logos in depth. But then after logos is ethos, the ethical appeal. That's the character of the speaker and the credibility, competence, and trustworthiness. And number 3 is pathos, the emotional appeal, the passion of the speaker. The speaker is passionate and appeals to the emotion of the audience. And number 4 is mythos, the narrative appeal. Have you already noticed something? Have I repeated these words more than once? Write this down in the margin. Repetition matters in communication. Repetition matters in communication. We're going to see this especially in a speech called I Have a Dream. We're going to look at that later this semester. And I Have a Dream is a master class in repetition. All right, number 2, the second major point on the outline, the 2 parts of the rhetorical process. You're going to give a speech. You're going to communicate a message. What do you have to do? Well, number 1 is invention, I-N-V-E-N-T-I-O-N, invention. And that is everything that goes into preparing to communicate the message. So you research, you write, you refine, you write an outline, what we call study and prepare and research and write, and you get the words just right. And all of that is in the preparation of the speech, the creation of a presentation or speech. In Aristotle's use of this, it's not making stuff up. It is finding out what you can trust and rely on to be right and truthful, and then putting it in a good way onto your paper before it leaves your mouth. And so invention. Aristotle actually had a number of canons, C-A-N-O-N-S. You can look it up, the canons of Aristotle. In fact, you might remember that in the article I had you read, 2 ways to guarantee a failed presentation, I listed the canons. But the 2 that I highlight that are most critical are number 1, invention. So write this down next to invention or underneath it. Have something to say. Have something to say. Invention, the creation of the presentation or speech, have something to say. Now, if you're a poor student, if you don't do good homework, you have not done a good job with invention. If you've got good homework done and you're not good at putting it in a good order and understandable order and a persuasive order, you're not good at invention. So you research, you put it together, you refine it, you choose your words, that's invention. The second element is delivery. It's exactly what it sounds like, how to deliver the message. And this is the actual presentation of the material. No matter how well you have prepared your speech, if you mumble, you don't talk loud enough to be heard, you have no energy. If you're not energetic and engaging and putting your body and your words together and speaking in a clear way, and I'm going to be teaching you about all of those elements. If you don't do all of that, then you will fail. I ask students when we have a live class, what's more important? Invention, having something to say, or delivery. If I didn't tell you to write this down, say it very well. Invention, have something to say. Delivery, say it very well. Which is more important? Invention or delivery? That's a trick question. They are equally important. Most good students in college, the good students who are A students, do a better job preparing the speech than they do delivering the speech. They work to the last minute, reading something new, adding to the outline, having everything they need to say exactly right. And we'll talk later about should you write your speech out in advance. We'll talk about that. But the good students really work on the content of the speech. but they don't rehearse the speech often enough to get comfortable delivering it and effective at delivering it. So you've got to have both. Have something to say, and then say it very well. Those are the two elements, invention and delivery. So I want you to write this in the margin. You need to practice, rehearse. You need to rehearse your speech 6 times. You're going to give a 4 to 8 minute speech twice during this semester, and then a shorter one later, but 4 to 8 minutes. So if you rehearse it 6 times and it's 8 minutes long, that's 48 minutes of rehearsal. That's not a lot of time. Each time you rehearse it, and then you pause and you think, what could I have done better? Now, let me tell you, you live in a marvelous era. Your phone has a video camera. When you rehearse your speech, I would say do this the first time you rehearse it, maybe the 4th time you rehearse it, and the last time you rehearse it. Video record yourself. Now, you've rehearsed your speech, you've got the video recording. What do you do with the video recording? Well, the first thing you do is you put your phone upside down where you can't see it, and you listen to your speech. Not by watching, but by listening. Only listening. Have you spoken your words clearly? Do they flow together well? Do they make sense as a speech? Can you hear your voice clearly? That's the first time you go over the recording. The second time, you turn your volume off and you watch your rehearsal of your speech. You just watch it. And you ask yourself, are my eyes looking at where the audience would be? It's tough with an online class. Am I gesturing? Do I have energy? And do I come across as though I care about this? So you watch it without words. And then the third time, you watch and listen together. It is excruciating. You'll see yourself scratching your nose or playing with your collar or playing with your pen or not looking up. It's really work to work on getting better. So that's my first short lecture on overview and initial concepts. From Aristotle, rhetoric is the art of finding the available means of persuasion, and then the 2 parts of the rhetorical process, Aristotle again, and that is invention and delivery. I'm going to stop the recording now, but no, I'm not. I need to tell you one thing. At the top of this page, write down this phrase: every bit of this is on the first test. You basically will need to be memorizing this sheet. I'll give you prompts for short answer. It will be open note, so you'll have your notes, but everything on this sheet is going to be on the first test. You're going to want to pay careful attention to learning this material, not just for the test, but because it's important communication concepts. Hope you learned from this. I'll be back with another lecture pretty quickly, maybe tomorrow or Thursday, to go over maybe most of the rest of this sheet front and back. Keep the sheet handy. Thank you. Bye-bye.